With the Investing News Network, I'm Scott Tibbles. Today I'm reporting from the floor of the International Mining and Resources Conference in Melbourne, or IMARC. And joining me now is Jason Chang of EMR Capital. Thank you for joining me, Jason.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it.
So for our listeners, can you just tell me a little bit about what your role is at EMR and what EMR does?
I'm the CEO and Managing Director of EMR Capital. EMR Capital is a mining private equity firm with a deep operational background. We invest and acquire mining projects, operate them, make operational improvements, and ultimately achieve a return for our investors, who are mainly from the United States.
And so at IMARC, you were just part of a panel on financing projects around the world. Can you just tell me a little bit about your thoughts from that panel? What was your main takeaway on that panel?
The main message to the audience is that the world of financing for mining has evolved over the last 10 years, over the last 5 years. We're seeing the public markets becoming less reliable as a means of financing for, mining projects and operations other than, the top 5 or 6 large mining houses. But if you're having a mining project today, then the IPO market is, more volatile than it used to be. We are seeing the emergence of private capital globally that's looking for a home in high-quality mining operations and mining projects, right? I mean, for EMR, a lot of our capital is from the United States, some from Europe, and certainly a lot of this capital had made good returns from oil and gas over the last few decades. They're looking for a new oil and gas, and we're seeing more and more appetite into, mining and metals. That's the first thematic. The second thematic is, the capital is becoming more specialized. Copper, there's consensus, universal acceptance that it's something that, you want to be investing in. But if you're going to some of the more specialty minerals, then you do need to look for, the specific capital pools which are targeting those sorts of metals. So in general, the second thematic is it's not one size fits all anymore. A lot of this capital is going through specialist fund managers like EMR because the capital markets have recognized that to go into something like mining and metals, it is specialized, it is technical, and partnering with an EMR Capital or similar types of private equity firms is going to be increasingly prevalent. So from the mining houses, really looking for, capital, it needs to be, the capital market is becoming far more sophisticated, right? So we're going to see more and more partnerships between private equity firms and mining houses, in addition to the more traditional IPO markets.
And you're saying that investors are looking for perhaps the next oil and gas. Do you think that copper has the potential to replace oil and gas as a major focus for investors around the world?
Absolutely. In all the dealings we've had, in terms of talking to the capital markets, there's no question everyone is chasing copper. It's, everyone recognizes that there aren't going to be too many new discoveries in copper of a material size that's not yet known. A lot of the big copper projects are locked up, whether it's government or, the big houses. So there aren't going to be very big new discoveries, that generally investors are feeling that way. So I think you're going to see everyone chasing copper, and our sort of thesis is we want to be looking into more traditional markets for copper like Australia. We love Australia, but ultimately long term, certainly you need to be going to where the ore body is. And so I think you're going to see, an evolution of, where that capital is going to be going.
And what does chasing copper look like? Do you think we're going to be seeing a lot more money invested into exploration over the coming years for copper?
I think we're going to see an increase in exploration in copper, no doubt. I mean, after all, the world needs more copper. I mean, the big economies, whether it's China or India or Southeast Asia, cannot grow without more copper consumption. We see copper as a good play into electric vehicles. There's good correlation there. That hasn't been factored in all of the analysis that we've seen in terms of the demand for copper. So there's good upside. No question that I think the mining houses will ultimately have to spend more money on exploring for more copper.
And for everyday investors, how would you have any tips on how they could look to be getting into copper? Would they be looking at larger companies that have copper locked up, or should they be looking into exploration, or should they be looking at throwing in with companies like EMR Capital?
Well, like any good investor, I guess a mixture of all of the above is probably sensible. I.e., you don't want to be putting all your money in one basket. Clearly, the majors have some good copper assets, and that's always one good avenue. But there will be some copper-specific projects that potentially, you can actually review. In addition, of course, the private markets again. If there's an avenue to go through a specialist fund manager in natural resources, that's another way, to looking at it as well.
Okay, and so looking at trends over the past year in copper, what would you say was the biggest trend for the red metal in 2019?
Quite a few. I think the growth of the bigger economies like China is probably the game changer in terms of copper consumption. I mean, the global demand for copper, a chunk of it is coming from the Asian economies, not just China, but China is a key player. So that clearly have changed the game. Secondly, increasing regulation around anything in mining, that's changing the game, and therefore it's going to take longer. It's going to cost more to build any mine today relative to 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So that's the second thematic. And the third is just technology. Ultimately, you look at EV or other types of new tech, copper is usually found in there somewhere. So all these themes are pointing towards, greater appetite for copper, and we aren't seeing a lot more new discoveries. So there's only one way this will go.
And do you have a price prediction for copper heading forward into 2020 and the next decade? Of course, we're heading into an entirely new decade in just a few months. What would you say going long would be the outlook for the commodity that investors can keep an eye on?
You're talking about price? I think the trend on copper, is pretty clear. I mean, it ought to be graduating upwards, and there's no question about that. As to the time frame, a bit hard to predict. Copper is currently, the current pricing on copper doesn't reflect, a lot of things I've just talked about. But, we are long-term investors, so we see the trend there as unquestionably upwards for copper.
Okay, well then, just coming down on what you've just said. So, what is your theory on why copper does not reflect a lot of the themes that you've just been talking about, its pricing?
Yeah, the current price today doesn't reflect, some of the thematics. It's probably a good time to therefore review acquisition on investment opportunities. Yeah.
Okay, and just so wrapping up, what would you say would be the most exciting thing to be investing in Australia? So obviously we're at IMARC, we're in Melbourne, we've got a lot of investors looking at the Australian resources industry. What is there to look forward to in this country, and what would you say sets it apart from so many of its peers? You said at the start of the interview that at EMR Capital you love Australia as a traditional investing base.
Australia is absolutely top of the list in terms of countries where we see appetite from capital markets to invest into. So the markets are telling us more capital is going to come into Australia, in Australian mines and operations and technology. So Australia is a great country for lots of reasons. You know, it's a very stable jurisdiction. It's got good regulation. It's got good government. It's got good knowledge on mining. So it ticks literally, you know, all of the boxes. And so from that perspective, you know, we are spending a lot of time looking for opportunities here in mining. Obviously, we also looking further afield. We like Canada, US, Chile. You know, some of those jurisdictions we are looking at. We like Indonesia. We've invested there and done very well. We know Indonesia very well. So these are the sort of tier 1 countries that we're looking at. There'll be others, but this is currently where we're looking for opportunities.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat with me, Jason.
Thanks, Scott.
And once again, I'm Scott Tibbles with the Investing News Network, and I've been speaking with the CEO of EMR Capital, Jason Chang.